Good day, students. I am Miss Kay, and welcome back to Practical Research 2. In continuation with the nature of inquiry and research, I'll be discussing the characteristics, processes, and ethics of research. Starting off with the characteristics of a research. Research is empirical. When we say empirical, it is based on direct experience or experiences of the researchers. This is something that is verifiable via information or rather observation and not just on the theories or speculations. Also, research is logical. When we say logical, it is based on valid arguments, procedures, and principles. So this is something that is well thought and is a product of sound reasoning. Research is cyclical. When we say cyclical, it ends or it starts with a problem and it ends with a problem as well. So how come? From our study comes another possible study to pursue by other researchers. So now, as we go on with our research study or research paper, we will encounter problems along the way. And these problems or conflict that may arise from our study may be something that other researchers can pursue, no, and can work on. Next to that is analytical. So research is also analytical in the sense that it utilizes proven analytical procedures and data gathering. So here we use organized and systematic procedure of how we gather data, how we interpret data, and how we present our data gathered. Research is also possesses the characteristic of being replicated or replicability. Okay, so the research design and procedures are replicated to enable the researcher to arrive at a valid and conclusive results. Just like, for example, in qualitative and quantitative, we have different available designs to follow. For quanti, we have descriptive, we have correlational, quasi-experimental, or experimental. And these are the designs that we may utilize in order for us to have a pattern to follow. How we are going to collect the data, what kind of data are we going to collect, and how would we interpret those data. Lastly, research is critical. So these exhibits careful and precise judgment. So here we require it requires objective and accurate evaluation of data gathered, to answer our research problem and the research questions that we have. Okay, so here, once we gather the data, we interpret the data, we decide based on the interpretation of our data gathered if we will be going to accept or to reject our hypothesis, if we have hypothesis in our study. Again, the characteristics of research are the following: empirical, logical, cyclical, analytical, replicability, and critical. Next, let's have the research process. So we know that research is a systematic process of conducting a study. And when it's a process, it follows certain steps. So here are the steps in conducting a research study. First is to define the research problem. Upon identifying the problem, we can proceed with reviewing related literature, then formulating the hypothesis, to designing the research, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and lastly, interpreting and reporting the data gathered. So step 1, define the research problem. Develop a research question, a problem that needs to be solved, or some missing of information about a particular topic. So in step 1, we basically determine what's the problem, or what's the questions that I have in mind that I want to be answered at the end of the study. All right. So the research problem actually provides us the topic, what or the do you call this, the guideline of what are the things that we will identify in our research study. Once we have identified the problem or the existing problem and come up with the research questions, we can proceed with step 2, which is reviewing the literature. So in reviewing the literature, we learn more about the topic being investigated. We can evaluate concepts from various references like journals, textbooks, researchers, newspapers, and many more. Now, in reviewing the literature, we look for supporting details that may somehow give us an idea or enlighten us. What are the available information regarding the problem or the topic that I am pursuing? When we already have enough literature and references, we can move forward to the next step, which is formulating the hypothesis. But please be reminded that not all study requires a hypothesis. Okay, hypothesis is usually something that can be found in studies that involves correlational, quasi-experimental, or experimental designs. Okay, so the hypotheses serve as a guide for validating the assumptions a researcher has made. It must be specified before the investigation is conducted. Ayan. Again, not all research study requires hypothesis, especially if the study is descriptive or has a descriptive research design. Okay, so what is hypothesis? Hypothesis is what we call the educated guess. This is what we assume at the beginning of our study and is something that we want to validate at the end. Okay, there are two types of hypothesis, the null and an alternative hypothesis, and it's very easy to distinguish one from another. No, when we say null, the statement goes like there is no significant difference between the two variables. For example, when we say alternative, there is a significant difference between the two variables. So it's as easy as that. When we say null hypothesis, it already assumes that there are no difference. But when we say alternative, it assumes that there is a difference. No? And of course, since this is just an educated guess, this needs to be proven at the end of the study. So at the end of your paper, if you have a hypothesis, you should we should be able to see there if you are accepting or rejecting the hypothesis based on the data you have gathered. When you identify your hypothesis, it's time for you to design your research study. So when we say research design, this provides a strategy for researching, and it constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. So for the research design in quantitative, we have the following: the descriptive design, the correlational, quasi-experimental, and experimental design. So what's the significance of these designs? These designs actually help us or guide us in what kind of information are we going to collect, how are we going to collect them, and how are we going to interpret them. No, kaya that's why research designs are called blueprint. When you have already decided for the design, then we can proceed with collecting the data. Now, and data can be collected in different forms. It could be through a survey or a survey questionnaire, through observations, and through literature. It can also be derived through experiments. Next to that, when we have already gathered or collected the data, now the data will not speak for itself. So it needs to be organized, analyzed, and interpreted. Okay. Next to the data collection or gathering is the analysis of the data gathered. So data can be analyzed through text analysis, statistics, and other forms. Text analysis Or textual interpretation, we mostly use that in qualitative research, but since we are dealing with quantitative, we will be using more of the statistical analysis. And lastly, step 7, interpreting and reporting the data. So, analyzed data must be given meaning, provide explanation whether objectives are met, results has to be shared. Okay, so when we already have gathered the data and analyze the data, and now we already have the results. Now, what's the last step? It's for us to interpret and report the result. You know, because when you organize the data, it is not yet given there. What is the result of your paper? What's the outcome? What are the answers to your research question? And did you accept or reject the hypothesis? No, those are the questions that are not yet being answered, because those are the things that you need to work on in interpreting and reporting the data. So once you have already organized that and analyzed, then you have to interpret. Now, what does this number say? What does this result tells us about? Okay, will I accept the hypothesis? Will I reject the hypothesis? What are the answers to my research questions? Now, those are the things that you will address in the interpretation and reporting of the data. That sums up the processes of research, Again, balikan lang natin. Let's go back with the process of research. Those are defining the research problem, reviewing the literature, formulating the hypothesis, analyzing the data, designing the research, collecting data, analyzing the data, and interpreting and reporting of the data. All right, so we're down with the last topic that we have. This is the ethics in conducting research. So what is ethics? It is determined as a branch of philosophy concerning with good or bad. It also deals with the moral duty and obligation. That's according to Fauca and Manzoru 2011. And in research, we are always using ethics or taking into consideration the ethics whenever we are conducting our studies. So what are these ethics? First is informed consent, assuring that the potential participants are fully aware and understand what is the research all about. Participants are expected to receive at least a consent form. Whether that is a survey questionnaire, an interview, or observation, no, you should always inform your participants. Okay, you should always get an approval and consent from them. So how do we do that? When we are using survey questionnaire in the beginning, before we go on with asking them a lot of questions regarding our study, we first provide a statement there, asking for their consent, wherein we introduce our topic, what are we pursuing, what are we doing, and what are the needed information, what are the information we need from them. All right, so that's a form of giving or informing or asking for informed consent. Next is beneficence. Promotes the safety of the participants and the community in all forms. It must consider the basic values of human and culture are not compromised. So study does not induce harm or violation to the mental, physical, emotional, moral, and cultural aspect of the person. So whenever we are conducting our study, we make sure that we are not violating, or we are not risking the safety of our participants in all aspects, in all of these aspects, may it be physical, moral, emotional, or cultural. We should, this is one of the ethics of research. We should always take into consideration their safety as our participants. Also, we have respect for anonymity and confidentiality. So identity of the participants remains unknown or confidential. This practice adheres to the Data Privacy Act of 2012. So our participants, provided they have given us consent, to collect their information, as researchers, it is our responsibility to make those information confidential and for the purposes of research alone. All right, we should be accountable of the information that they have trusted us with. All right, and also whenever we are what do you call this, presenting our paper, or we are publishing our paper, um their what do you call this, their identity must be kept. Yeah. Next to that is fairness. Selection of participants and locality must be based on relevance and necessity to the study. All right. So this is, I guess, one of the common mistake that most of the researchers, especially when we lack time, and resources, now we don't conform to mostly. But this is some very important for us to follow. Fairness. We don't select participants based on their availability. We don't select participants just because we have an easy access to them. We have to make sure that the locale or the participants that we are selecting are actually experiencing the phenomena and they're actually relevant to the study. They represent well the population. Next, accountability. Researchers should remain responsible to promote transparency in presenting collected data, results, methodologies, and publication status. So accountability. This refers to us researchers being transparent with the processes of our study. So all of the methods, all of the data that we have gathered, may it prove or disprove our claim, should be presented. Now, because that's the purpose of research, to identify, to prove or disprove something. No, and as research being logical and being fair, we have to make sure that all of the information that we have gathered in the study will be presented and will not be kept. Integrity. Conduct a study with honest and verifiable methods and adheres with accepted research practices. Okay, so when we say accepted research practices, these should we should follow all of the needed practices here, or all of the steps that needs to be taken in conducting the study. For example, having our instrument validated, asking help for certain professionals to help us out in our study, like for example the statisticians, the validators, and all. No, and we have to make sure that we keep our integrity as researchers, that we only use honest methods in conducting the study. So that's it. That ends the ethics in conducting a research. Let's go back for a bit. Those are informed consent, beneficence, respect for anonymity and confidentiality, fairness, accountability, integrity. If you have any questions, concerns, or clarification, you may comment on the comment section in the Google Classroom, or you may send me an email with this email, mchristine@ucc.ph, or you may simply connect with your research advisor. And thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.